Good evening and welcome to the UVA Club of Boston's virtual lecture with Professor Gary Ballinger. I hope everyone is safe and well. Yes, and thank you for joining us. My name is Joshua Stewart. I work for the Office of Engagement and am a graduate of UVA in 2018. Before we get started, I would like to go over some of the house rules. We would love to know who's in the audience. So if you wouldn't mind sharing your name and UVA affiliation in the chat box below, that would be great. Then the second part, throughout the talk, please feel free to input any questions you have in the Q&A box below, and we will get to them at the conclusion of Professor Ballinger's talk. I would now like to introduce UVA Club of Boston's co-president, Stevie Farmer.
Hi everyone, wahoo. Like Josh said, my name is Stevie Farmer and I'm one of the co-presidents of the UVA Club of Boston along with Tom Taylor. I'm also a 2014 McIntire grad. Definitely feels weird not being able to see everyone in their Zoom backgrounds, but I'm sure most of you are wearing blue and orange like me, even though the hat is mostly for covering my quarantine hair. We have over 200 registrants for this event, which is a huge testament to Professor Ballinger, the love of Tony Bennett and the Who's, plus the amount of free time we all have. What started out as an idea from one of our board members, Lori, has quickly turned into not only a UVA Boston event, but also a McIntire and UVA clubs at large event. While we have a broad audience tuning in, I did want to share a few UVA Boston updates. Our board of 15 to 20 members meets monthly and coordinates all sorts of events to engage our local alumni, parents, students, and friends. This includes community service, student send-offs, networking, lifetime learning, and much more. But like every other organization, we've been affected by COVID-19. We've postponed or canceled a number of events like volunteering at the Boston Marathon, our Accepted Students Party, as well as Malcolm Brogdon coming to play against the Boston Celtics. So we've pivoted to virtual programming to engage our club members. And last month, which feels like forever ago, we converted a live event into the first UVA Club's virtual event hosted by Dean of the Library, John Unsworth. The event went really well, and we'd love your feedback on future topics or speakers. You can reach out to uvaboston@gmail.com with any ideas you have. So now on to tonight's event and Professor Gary Ballinger. Gary's been teaching at McIntire since 2005 and is admired by many years of comm school alumni. It shows tonight with 7 decades of UVA alumni registered for this event. Professor Ballinger has taught courses in leadership, organizational behavior, and human resources management at the undergraduate, graduate, and executive levels in the US and in Germany. In 2013, he won an All-University Teaching Award from UVA. Professor Ballinger conducts research on the operation of memory, emotions, and social exchange relationships in the work and organizational context. This research spans all levels of analysis, including work relationships, firm stakeholder relationships, and corporate governance. Gary did his undergraduate studies at UVA, studying American government, his MBA at Wake Forest, and his PhD at Purdue. Must have been quite the Elite Eight game for you last year. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Professor Gary Ballinger.
Well, thank you very much, Stevie. It's a privilege to be here, and it's great to see. I took a peek in the participants column, so many familiar faces and names in there. And it's just great to see everybody here, and I want to thank you for that. As you well know, it's the same as it's been challenging for you. It's been challenging for us. I was in Las Vegas at the Pac-12 conference tournament when, on that Wednesday night, things just started to close down. I was sitting in a suite watching the last 2 games of the evening, and word just kept coming over the news ticker that conference after conference after conference was closing down its tournaments. And by Friday of that week in the comm school, we were having a faculty meeting talking about hosting everything virtually and going online with the classes. We took 3 days off and came back into session that following Thursday after spring break in virtual form, and taught the rest of the semester this way, using Zoom and a lot of breakout rooms and interactive exercises. We had terrific student engagement, in case you're interested. I guess it's really hard to cut a class if you're at home with your folks. So we had as many as 98 to 100% attendance in blocks and in my electives classes. And it was just a good time. Everybody sort of took it in the spirit that it was offered, and there was a lot of flexibility, both from the faculty standpoint with regards to students, but students with regards to dealing with faculty who are slowly, gradually dragging themselves into the 21st century with the technology involved. For those of you that went to the comm school and worked in Rouse and Robertson Hall, you'll know this is my office, or if you took a class from me, you'll know this is my office. It is, it's clean-ish from the way it usually is. I've got sort of Lego objects in the back of the room here, and all sorts of mementos and stuff. I have a very difficult time throwing stuff out. As you well know, you can see there's a little bit of sort of junk over here in the corner. There's even more back there as well. But it's a pleasure to be broadcasting to you from my office tonight here in Rouse and Robertson Halls in Charlottesville. So it's been terrific. It's a terrific opportunity. And I want to thank Lori and Tom and Stevie and the whole UVA Club of Boston for the invitation. So with that, we ready to go? Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen. And again, for those of you that took classes from me before 2017, don't be shocked. My slide game improved. So here we go. We're going to load up and get ready to go here. And we're going to talk today about what Virginia basketball's last decade teaches us about culture, change, and strategic competitive advantage. So for those of you who are into business school or have been to business school, you're going to know a lot of these terms about competitive advantage in particular. Bear with me as we sort of talk through a little bit about what they mean in the context of both businesses and for-profit organizations, as well as in the context of sports teams. And we will talk about that a lot as we move along here as well. So without much further mention, let's get started with the big footnote, which is to say this work isn't necessarily mine. I do work on executive succession and leadership change in organizations. So I do a lot of research in that. And then I also do a lot of research on values and culture and the way values are communicated by people inside a culture and to people outside a culture as well. And so I'm familiar with a lot of research on connecting organizational culture to strategic competitive advantage. Professor Jay Barney, who's now at the University of Utah, really pioneered both the view of specific resources providing you with competitive advantage, but also improved and refined the notion that culture, your organizational culture, can be a source of sustainable competitive advantage for an organization or a firm. And I'm also borrowing a little bit from the work of John Carter. Again, if you've been through an MBA program, you've bought the book with the penguins on it. I've seen them all over the place. And for my own electives, I've assigned this work and work based on his leading change framework now for multiple years. And so this is just a big global footnote to start that some of this work is going to ring out of that and be applied to what we've seen over the last decade in Virginia basketball. So without much further mention, let's just talk about competitive advantage and what it is, okay? Competitive advantage is sustained superior performance versus industry competitors. It's careful to understand that the notion has to be sustained, that you have to be able to do better than someone else over a long period of time. It has to look, the pattern of performance has to look something like this. This would be 2012 to 2020, and we'll go back to 2010 and 2011 a little bit later. But what you'll see here is considerably above average performance in a specific arena, Division I college basketball, that's maintained year after year after year with very little disturbances. No fewer than 22 wins in a season, no more than 12 losses in a season, and the worst winning percentage is 2/3 or 66%. That's pretty sustained there, and that's evidence that there is some sustained competitive advantage. But what does it mean? How does one get it? This is your local rock pile. It sells rocks, aggregate in industry terms. These rocks are the same as the rocks that another company sells, just one county over. I mean, rocks are rocks. I mean, there may be quality differences, but they're super hard to detect. And really, the only reason your rock pile sells them to local construction sites versus somebody else is because it's closer to them than the rock pile the next county over. It costs a lot to ship this kind of stuff. So the rock pile here has some advantage. But if you bought the farm next door, that one right there, up in the upper right-hand corner of the picture, and dug a rock pile there, well, neither one of you can win that game if you're competing against each other. because neither one of you has an advantage. This is truck stop coffee. I'm old enough to remember enjoying it, A. B, paying maybe $1 a cup for it, not 50 cents, I'm not that old. And C, not really being willing to pay more for good coffee versus bad coffee. Coffee was just coffee when I was growing up. While there were plenty of places that said they had better coffee, no one charged significantly more for it until we got to this. This is $3 a cup. I mean, if you buy the venti size, right? And $2, maybe $1.50 extra if you buy the tall size. Starbucks has created a competitive advantage, right? The $2 extra you pay per cup tells you Starbucks has some advantage. But what is it? Is it the coffee? I mean, they'll sell you the beans. They're in the grocery store. Is it the machine? No, they'll sell you a machine. You can order them on Amazon.com all you want. In this case, well, it's everything. It's a combination. It's the brand. It's the atmosphere. It's the fact that someone takes their time over your cup of coffee. The place smells like coffee even. It smells better than a truck stop. It's everywhere you are, on foot, as opposed to just right off the interstate. It's an edge. It's an advantage. It's hard to put your finger on, but it certainly matters. Well, now that you've got the edge, though, to sustain it means that you have to keep it, right? And how do you keep it? Well, build a moat. What's a moat? Well, it is just exactly what I said it was. It's just what it sounds like. A moat is what prevents the masses from storming the castle. It's what sets you apart. In Starbucks' case, for example, it's the brand. It's going to cost you a pile of cash and a lot of time to get a brand in all those locations that are just as valuable. The amount of cash and time is a measurement of how big the moat is and how effective it is at repelling the hordes attempting to storm your castle. For any organization that wants to stay ahead, one of the best moats of all is your culture. Organizational culture and organizational culture are those unspoken assumptions about how we see the world. They're the philosophies and values that guide our behaviors. You can often determine a particular culture simply by listening to people talk about it, but not to talk about their culture. The way they talk about problems, really, is the way you listen for and detect it. Culture is learned. If you have been a part of the integrated core experience for the last 4 or 5 years around McIntire, you know that we do this exercise in organizational behavior class where we have pairs of students sorting pictures. And they sort them, you sort a stack of 9 pictures in a particular order. One person has the stack of pictures, the other person knows what the order is, and has to describe the order, the pictures, in order, and the person has to sort through them. And it's a very complicated process. In the beginning, it takes groups about 3 to 3.5 minutes to do it. This is how culture is learned, solving that problem over and over and over again. So culture is learned. It's quickly learned through interactions between people that are successful at solving a common problem. In the context of that example, sorting the pictures is the common problem. People puzzle through it first. It may take some time, right? And some groups don't make it at all. Evolution, organizational evolution, is going to tell you that some groups don't make it through this process at all. But the people that succeed are the ones that grow faster and faster at it. They develop a shorthand for it. They develop artifacts like languages or an eye roll or a single word or a hand gesture or something like that that instantly will tell you that it's this picture, not that picture there. It's taught as well by the problem solvers to the problem solvers. So much of corporate culture, executive organizational culture, much of any culture is taught by its practitioners at the immediate or team level of analysis, as opposed to being projected or communicated down by executives. Eventually, these institutions are passed down from person to person, right? These assumptions about solving common problems will translate into cultural institutions. Eventually, the teams in our exercise in OB can sort the pictures in as little as 15 seconds there. And it's astounding to watch over 6 or 7 times after they do it. These institutions in a society, in an organization, in the sports teams, they arise to efficiently solve these problems. In a national culture, for example, political systems, legal systems, economic systems, and business customs all sort of exist to resolve the common problems that people have encountered in the past in dividing resources or sharing time or the like, in solving these common problems. And that's how you get a culture. What makes a culture strong is agreement on what it stands for. In these cases, we see one culture where lots of people have different views on the notion of individualism or collectivism, how we share credit, for example, for how things are done. And so in the example on the left, you'll see these are opinions of different team members, and there's a wide variety of them in terms of people taking credit at the individual level for how things work. That's the individualist side, as opposed to people attributing the group as the credit for how things happen and why things happen. That's at the collective level. The dispersion between all the dots will tell you that that's a weak culture. There isn't a whole lot of agreement between people there. On the other hand, when you have a strong culture, everybody knows we did this. It's not I did this, it's we did this. And everybody communicates in that language using that way of referring to specific problems. Generally, stronger cultures are ones with high agreement, and where those who don't fit that culture leave. We'll bookmark that thought for a little bit later. So what does a strong culture do for you? Well, it makes coordination easier, more efficient, more effective. You can do more on the court, in competition, in your store, with fewer managers or policies, fewer scripts or plans. Communication costs are lower as your culture gets stronger. The more people don't have to talk about how they see a problem, instead agreeing on how they see the problem means the less you have to spend time telling people how to see a problem and what to do about it there. How does it play out? A unique culture in sports teams, for example, okay, we want to have a unique culture. A unique culture in a sports team is going to play out through various things such as selection and staffing practices. So recruiting and playing time, who plays, how much, and when there. It's going to take place through the context of decision-making. So how much coordination and interdependence is there in play? In basketball, how many baskets are assisted on versus created in a one-on-one setting, for example? Or how much or how often are timeouts called in order to call a specific play at a specific time versus how much people actually know what to do? And it also takes place in the context of leadership, coaching style, and the extent to which coaches and other players share influence amongst each other there. So a unique culture really is going to play out in what you see publicly on the football field, on the soccer pitch, on the basketball court. It's going to take place in all of those places where you see something that looks distinctive from what you might see another team or organization do. Strong cultures as well, and this is important, strong cultures are felt as opposed to thought. It makes them hard to describe there. Since cultures generally form around shared values, they're represented in unspoken assumptions and shared but coded languages. It's learned, sure, but then it's felt. It is hard to fake. If you're looking for me to describe Virginia's men's basketball culture to you, well, I can't either, and no one really from a distance can describe it. Like many organizational secrets, good ones at least, those who know don't say, and those who say don't know. But you can see where it plays a role in the success of the organization. What makes a culture a source of competitive advantage? Well, we really want to zero in on three particular factors here. Factors leading to competitive advantage include the notion that the culture is valuable, that it's rare, and it's hard to imitate. Let's reflect on these in a basketball context. I'll start though with a baseball example. In the book Moneyball, for example, Michael Lewis reviewed Billy Beane and the Oakland Athletics approach to selecting talent that had different virtues from what other people in the market for talent in terms of baseball players were valuing at the time. Those virtues were also important to success on the baseball field. It didn't necessarily make the players the A's were drafting better than the players that other teams were drafting. It just meant that they were just as skilled, but you had to look in a different place using a different lens to select them, right? They succeeded by finding successful players with, quote, plate discipline and good minor league stats that could actually be projected to the major leagues, in large part because the other participants in the market weren't interested and could not see how they could succeed with those players. It made the A's less dependent year over year over year on being successful in a talent market where it's hard to be successful year after year. Think about how this fits in the market for talent in college basketball. If you have a valuable resource, does it allow the organization to exploit opportunities or defend against threats? Okay. In the 3 years since 2010, Virginia's had 3 top 25 recruiting classes that I saw on ESPN.com. 20th in 2012, 8th in 2016, ranked 15th this year. So look out there. But what you can see about the market for recruiting college basketball players is that it's highly competitive, and it's really hard year over year over year to be repeatedly successful in this market. You'll see constantly teams succeed in 1 or 2 years in a row, and the team then succeeds for 3 or 4 years with those talented players before ultimately fading back to the norm, regressing to the mean, as it were, as they can't sustain repeated success in this marketplace, which is very competitive and it's very well covered. It's really hard to get an advantage because there's talent everywhere. If you have an approach that permits different talents to succeed, you can look in the places other people aren't looking too. You can also get the very most out of it when you attract talent that everyone else thinks fits them as well. But importantly, you're less dependent on winning at something very few players consistently win in the long term. It's important, again, because if you have stability in this market, you're less dependent on this. And you can avoid going toe-to-toe repeatedly with other potentially dominant players, right? These are some of the teams that you would see that are consistently dependable in that market. Everybody else hits for a couple of years, misses for a couple of years, and then the coach gets fired. And that's how it works. One other way that this is a valuable resource, your culture, is that it becomes reflected in behavior that takes place without advanced thinking. Critical moments are realized in an instant without planning or forethought. It's an essential aspect to a game as unscripted and interdependent as basketball. Strong culture lets you execute planned and unplanned actions quickly. I'll just put up 3 examples. Now, I can't afford the copyrights for these videos. So one of these days when I have millions of dollars, I'll be able to show these. But there were specific events that took place over 5.9 seconds, 1.5 seconds, even actually 0.9 seconds there because the foul shots were taken with 0.6 left. And then the Braxton Key block at the end of regulation in the championship game. Improvised but planned, right? There were timeouts before 2 of the 3 events took place. But in all of these cases, because it's basketball, it's interdependent. It's hard to plan for all the permutations. But if your culture's there and the opportunity presents itself, everybody knows how to exploit it like that and without much talk about it. You can go back and look at previous examples. When we beat Louisville in 2018, in the last second, we were well out of timeouts for a long period of time there, right? That's a sign that your approach is valuable. Okay, I'll just leave these here. We can talk a little bit more about these. We can recap all of these if you want. We got 3 hours there to do that. The next factor that leads to culture creating a competitive advantage is that it's rare. Okay, if everyone does it, what good is it? What you want to have is an approach that's distinctive. Okay, you can have an extreme approach that's so unique it's rare and hard to cope with. And in particular in college basketball, it can be hard to cope with for opponents that don't see it that often and have players who aren't as experienced as your players. 2020 KenPom, I hit my KenPom subscription hard for this one. Our offense spent 21.1 seconds with the ball on average. That is 353rd out of 353 teams. It's the best in college basketball. And what you just heard me do was a language-based values inversion of culture, right? Because if you hear a lot of people say they're 353rd, they might say they're the lowest or slowest in college basketball. We'll just say it's the best, thank you. Only 12 teams nationally take over 20 seconds to shoot the ball there. This has not changed. So even when the NCAA shrank the shot clock from 35 to 30 seconds, our numbers are around 20 to 21 seconds holding the ball before a shot. Defense, 18.8 seconds. So 351st out of 353. That's one sign that you're distinctive, that your culture, your approach is rare. If you look through the graphic in the kenpom.com coaching resume for Virginia over the last 10 years, what you'll see are a lot of darker shades in there. And one of the things about that website is that the darker the shade, the more extreme the style is relative to everyone else. So assist ratio, this year we were #1 in the country in blocks, block percentage. There's all sorts of like times and places where we were #1 in the country in something, be it tempo, defense, offensive efficiency in some years is very high, or the like. So you'll see a lot of those darker shades. That indicates that the culture indeed is rare, right? It's a sign that it's distinctive, that it's unique. Now, we're not the only one with a rare culture, so let's not get hung up on ourselves too much here. It's important not to think of ourselves as better. What's essential is that it's different, right? There are lots of other college basketball programs with unique cultures that serve them very well and create for them also a source of competitive advantage, right? Some teams have an extraordinary ability to repeatedly and rapidly integrate talent. It's amazing how you can consistently bring in people and in their first year and only year, perhaps in the program, do very well. And what the program like Duke or Kentucky does in terms of sustaining and maintaining a culture year after year, that's remarkable. Some perfect a particular style of play. There's the notion of Carolina basketball, which plays at a very fast tempo, or Syracuse year after year with the 2-3 zone defense. Villanova has a certain pace in a three-point shooting. They take their time with the ball as well there. That's a particularly different and unique culture that you'll see there. Also strong, again, it's important to think through, again, it's just important that it's rare. Some have unique arrangements with suppliers of critical resources like talent, and we're not going to name anybody here. So I don't want to ruffle anybody's feathers here, but some teams happen to know different ways of getting particular critical resources, and we'll just leave that there. So understand what's rare there is important. The last factor that leads to culture creating a competitive advantage is that it's hard to imitate, right? A big tip as to what you believe is your source of competitive advantage lies in what you give away or let other people see. So, can you copy the defense? Well, sure, you can copy this defense all you want. There are books out there, right? There's tapes. Dick Bennett, Tony's dad, has a tape. There's videotape out there. You can put a tape on the floor, get the book, just like driving with the owner's manual in your lap, you can figure out how to get it done. Other teams even play the same type of defense. So Chris Mack, who moved from Xavier to Louisville, you hear commentators talk all the time about how they play a pack line defense there. And while they have been successful, sustainably successful, it's not quite at the level of of our program at this point there in terms of his programs. It's real close, but not quite there yet. So can you copy the tempo? Nobody's making you shoot it this fast, right? Nobody's making you shoot the ball yet, okay? You don't have to shoot it. There are other successful teams out there that take their time, right? Villanova, very successful team. They are very high. Take a lot of time to shoot. Wisconsin, University of Cincinnati, they've all been fairly successful over the years, particularly Villanova and Wisconsin, taking their time in shooting the ball. A big tip as to what you believe is your source of competitive advantage lies in what you give away or let other people see. I mean, heck, we'll even tell you what the 5 pillars are, right? Humanity, passion, unity, servanthood, thankfulness. Like it's in a UVA published publication there. We will tell you. It is not a secret what these values are there. How you put them together, that's different. That's the secret, right? It's pretty likely that it's not the source of your competitive advantage if that's what you're giving away. You could say it's the defense or the tempo or whatever, but there are tapes and videos and analysts and others out there who are doing the same thing with the defense or the same thing with the tempo, even espousing some of the same values without the same results. Starbucks will give you the beans, like I said. You too can sell cars for one low, no haggle price, just like CarMax does. They're not going to stop you. They haven't copyrighted the business practice. So the defense isn't a secret, and you can hold the ball as long as we do, okay? What makes it costly to imitate is the time and persistence required and the willingness to stay true to the culture over the needs of individuals is usually where things start to break down. It's hard to do this. We'll go into the Wayback Machine there. That's for viewers of a certain age. That is Sherman and Mr. Peabody in front of the Wayback Machine. It's an old Bullwinkle reference there. And I want you to think back. How long did this take, okay? And how radical of a shift this was. What's hard to imitate are the connections between the pieces, the defense, the tempo, the values, the players, everything about it, how it's put together, okay? The willingness to change inside the institution and how to live all of it, and the willingness to persist, even in the face of all the challenges that we face, right? This is Kotter's 8 stages for leading change, for organizational change. We'll walk through some of these, and I'll touch on a couple of them in relation to our experience in Virginia basketball, with Virginia basketball as fans and as stakeholders over the last 10 years. So we established a sense of urgency, create the guiding coalition, develop a vision and strategy, create the change vision itself, empower broad-based action, generate short-term wins, consolidate gains, and then produce more change, and anchor those new approaches in the culture. And we're going to talk more about the first 3 and the last 2 here in detail. One of the biggest things that facilitates any change effort is a sense of a crisis or a sense of urgency. In this case, that was created by a decade of meh performance that left stakeholders feeling deeply meh about the institution of Virginia basketball. This is not going 6-21 and 7-20 in 2 years in a row, which is what Washington State University had done before hiring Dick Bennett, or going from 1945 to the present with 1 NCAA trip like Wisconsin had before they hired Dick Bennett as well. It was more a sense, if you remember correctly, that we had no identity. We didn't know who we were. We just weren't what we wanted to be. And this goes back, right? If you remember in 2002, 3, 4, we played fast, except for the 1 year after we had a coaching change. And then in 2006, we played slow. And then we played fast again. Those adjusted tempo ranks are out of 353 teams. And they're pretty fast, but they're not the fastest. There's nothing signature or distinctive about those ratings. And what you'll notice about the records until you get to the very end there is that there's nothing particularly signature or distinctive about them either. There were 2 NCAA tournament trips in there, neither one of which was particularly successful in terms of a long run there. So this was a comment from 2009 at the very end of the Leto era, which just pointed out how we had no identity. We shot worse and defended shots worse than anybody else in the conference. And that pretty much tells you that if you're going to be asking the question, who are we or what are we all about? The answer is, we don't know. And that's important. So when you come in with a sense of urgency, right, the new culture is going to start like most changes do, with executive succession. In this case, key stakeholders lined up behind a new approach and a vision and culture and strategy that were well known to the public and the profession beforehand. When you hired Tony Bennett, you knew exactly what you were going to get. He had coached for a couple of years at Washington State. He had coached indeed in the past, but before that, as with his father, and his father's approach at Wisconsin was well known, both in terms of the tempo and defense, but also the results that would come through it with it. Wisconsin's first ever Final Four trip, repeated trips to the NCAA tournament as well in terms of a success. And so when you hire a new coach, you get an executive succession. It's important that they come in with the support of the stakeholders, of all the stakeholders, and then that they stick with it. They consolidate gains and produce more change and anchor new approaches in the culture. You have to develop a system where transition is important. So this is just a running history of Virginia point guards over the years. The quote coach on the floor, as it were, and there are lots of coaches on the floor. But what you'll see is the transitions year after year after year, from John Tell Evans to London Parantis to Ty Jerome to Kihei Clark. And over the years, those handoffs have become smoother and smoother and allow you to create the change and keep the culture as manifest in the style of play on the floor as consistent. The other thing that you have to do is you have to accept that everyone isn't going to fit a culture. This was a quote from 2013 there. Since Coach Bennett took the job, 9 players have departed early, 8 to other college programs. There's a long list of names of Virginia transfers. That record kept up even into 2018 and 2017. And you can see that there are places where a certain person may not fit in the long run or the short run. And with love, they are allowed to leave there. And they leave that culture, keeping the culture strong without making changes in it to accommodate one particular person becomes particularly important in maintaining the constancy of that culture. Anchoring in the culture requires constancy. So I put up a chart of Washington State after Tony Bennett left. And so what you'll see in 2007 to 2009, these are the adjusted tempo ratings for Washington State, and their winning percentages in 2007 and 8, or 8 and 9 are when Tony was there. His last year was a 500 season, and he left. He was hired away. They would have loved to have kept him there, but you saw that program constantly played at that particular tempo. And then over the next 10 years under 3 different coaches, what you'll notice by all those numbers in terms of their tempo ranks is it's not obvious they know who they are. One year they play moderate pace, one year they're super fast, one year they're slow, one year they're really slow. The next year after that, they're super fast. They don't know who they are, and they fall into a spiral of making change after change after change. Many organizations fall into this trap of not maintaining a particular culture and being constant with it after executives leave. We can't show that example because, as we note, we hope this arrow on the bottom keeps going on way off the page there. But these are our adjusted tempo ratings for the 3 years before Tony Bennett took the job, and then you'll see it in the 10 years since. Okay, and as I note, our adjusted tempo ranking is best in the D1 basketball space in the last 4 years. So in 2017 and 18, there were only 351 teams playing Division I ball, and the last 2 years it's 353 here. So why doesn't everybody do this? Change is hard. That's why. Stakeholder opinions are mixed. You may hear a lot of chatter about our fan base wouldn't stand for it. Think of how many new business approaches are abandoned because, quote, the customer won't stand for this. You give it a try. No one wants to play in that system. You'll read that on Twitter a lot. Remember, there are people with your values out there. They may not always be where everyone's looking, but you can bring them in. Persistence is needed. We forget how there wasn't visible improvement in the win-loss record in the first couple of years. We were a 500 team. We lost like 8 or 9 games in a row to end the 2009 season. Popular unrest can arise after setbacks, and there's a lot of turnover, like I said, of people that we love. If you think about 2011 or 12, the many struggles we had against Michigan State, the Syracuse game, the St. Patrick's Day game of 2018, we won't mention anything more about that. And there are haters everywhere. I mean, honestly, just read Twitter, right? Look at non-UVA Hoops Twitter. UVA Hoops Twitter, there are no haters there, right? There are national writers like Byron Metcalf and Pat Forty out there constantly taking shots at the program, its culture, its people, its style. There are even passive-aggressive complaints that you hear from leading commentators on outlets like ESPN that talk about freedom of movement or the shot clock is too long. That can subtly wear down your stakeholders' resolve. People ask, just this once, can we try something different? The answer has to be no. You have to stick to your culture. It needs to fit you. Your culture needs to be your culture. All of your stakeholders have to agree with it. And in order for it to be sustainable and remain in place for a long period of time, it has to be felt versus thought. It has to take place in System 1 versus System 2. If you believe in these values, then you don't have to ask yourself what they are. So with that, I'll conclude. Thank you very much for your patience. I may have ran a little over time there, but thank you very much for your patience, everybody.
Now we're going to take some time to do some Q&A. So,
and I can extend. I can personally extend Q&A. I got a house load of time.
And Stevie is going to moderate that.
Sure. So I guess to start, I'm going to combine 2 questions here. So the first question is from Sharon, a 1977 alum. How does one keep a team of any sort motivated during a shutdown like this one? As well as a question from a 2011 McIntire alum, Mana, saying, how can you lead culture change and motivate virtually?
Well, doing it virtually is important to co-construct the engagement. So again, if you've got a culture that everybody feels, putting people into small teams that you're not observing is going to be an essential part of it. You're letting go a little bit of it, even on the virtual standpoint, and letting people co-create the material, co-create the content that's being produced is going to be important. You can do it without, to the extent to which you can do it without rules, or to which the rules emerge from what everybody else just does there. And then they may be codified, but everybody sort of understands these are our norms in a virtual environment. This is how, from a virtual standpoint, we're going to attempt to generate personal contact where that's not necessarily available there. And the last thing is to, without, this is being recorded, so be judicious about this. Without cheating, try to see somebody you know. I've run into some people around the building, some students around the building, and it's always a joy, or to run into a colleague and even to just talk briefly at about 12-foot distance, like, what are you doing? What are you trying? And so on. It's really kind of important as things hopefully begin to start opening up, and it's going to be a little bit while longer in the Northeast. The notion of being able to get even micro meetings together of 1 or 2 people on the team to sort of re-engage is going to be essential to rebuilding that context virtually.
Nice. And then next question from Colin, a 2013 McIntire alum. What company do you think has been able to create the same turnaround success in business as the Who's on the court?
Oh, Microsoft is my favorite example. Microsoft used to have a very strong culture, but there was a long period of time where, when it was run by Steve Ballmer in particular, that it became known as an aggressive culture. And it became aggressive because the way they ranked employees was the same way that firms like GE or Accenture did. They used what was called a stack ranking system. So managers were required to hand out a certain number of excellent ratings, good ratings, fair ratings, and poor ratings. And you had to give out poor ratings. So no matter how talented your staff was, and you should think that they were particularly talented because you hired them at Microsoft, you had to rate some employees as poor, and they got less stock, they got less benefits, and they were sometimes encouraged to leave. What that ended up doing was prohibiting collaboration between parts of the organization. So when Satya Nadella took over from Ballmer, he came out of more of a technology unit that had to collaborate to succeed. So Ballmer was out of sales, Nadella was out of the cloud unit, and he got rid of stack ranking. It used to be true that Microsoft was a lot of warring divisions going against each other because they felt like collaborating with each other would help the other guy and hurt their own rankings. And he got rid of stack ranking, and that's really changed the culture there. And go look at a stock chart for that firm. It's even held up not very well in this situation there. So that would be my best example of it right now to look at.
Cool. And then a question from Jack, a 2016 McIntire alum. In an environment like this, where many organizations are faced with headcount decisions, how should leaders think about the trade-off between cost savings versus the impact on company culture? Is there any way to quantify the puts and takes or make a data-driven decision?
It's hard because what you end up with is what's called, there's 2 things. There's obviously you're losing the talent that is furloughed or is forced out. And then there's survivor guilt on the other side. So the people that remain oftentimes feel a certain amount of overpayment guilt. Like, wow, so I'm lucky, but that just means maybe it's coming for me next or the like. When you evaluate that, it's important to be as open and upfront to the people that you're dealing with about what the economic pressure is and what parts of the business are more pressured than others. It's hard. If you own a restaurant, for example, and you're doing takeout, you may be able to make it with 1 server, but you can't lay off anybody in the kitchen staff. If demand is the same, all you need is the 1 server to take it from the window out to the curb. And so a place like Moe's Barbecue doesn't necessarily have as much cashier staff or wait staff out there, but the people doing the brisket behind the counter, there's as many of them there as possible as they can have. You have to explain it, and then at some point you have to make the decision and indicate that it's for the good of the business. With that said, the strongest companies are the ones that are hanging on to staff, even at the expense of profits or raising capital to do it. So when I go back to Las Vegas, I'm going to stay at the Wynn, or I'm going to stay at the Sands casino properties, because they've paid their people. MGM laid all of their people off everywhere immediately. Wynn and Sands have the people still on the payroll all the way through May, and they're scratching and clawing. And I'm sure they've got enough liquidity. They've said they have enough liquidity to do it, and they are going to do it. There, they know and have stated publicly that they need to be able to open like that. And if you furloughed everybody and then you start to bring people back, you will have lost a lot of the culture and the trust of people in that particular culture. So I would tell Jack, borrow as much as you can there, and try to keep as many of your people on as possible.
We have a couple of questions kind of on replicating success. So one from Bruce, a 1997 alum, asking, why haven't more programs copied Coach Bennett's formula for success? Are you aware of any who have tried and failed? And if so, what makes the UVA an outlier?
Well, the current program that's trying it, and we'll see how they do, but it's from a different position, is Liberty University. So Richie McKay comes out of this institution and goes down there, and they are, if we were if we played the best tempo, 350, the 353, I think they were 352. And they won a bunch of games, and we'll see how it goes there. Again, there are other systems that came before us that have sort of lost this particular thread, but no. You can go back over time. There are pro basketball examples from the 90s. Mike Fratello's Cleveland Cavaliers started one of the bigger shifts in professional basketball by holding the ball long into the 24-second shot clock. And that reduced the number of points per game in professional basketball as other people started to imitate that. But this particular style and this particular culture at this extreme a level, no. And it's for some part of it, it's for the reasons I talked about earlier. There are haters. There are some entrenched fan bases or stakeholders that simply wouldn't put up with it. They couldn't deal with the responses of their neighbors or the like. That's what's out there. And sometimes it's just easier to be flashy and mediocre in that case, right? For them, as opposed to steady and excellent.
And then similarly in the chat, someone brought up Ron Sanchez, how he switched over to Charlotte.
Yeah.
And then a question at the end of it says, how can a program overcome the expectations of replication?
Well, you can overcome the expectations of replication. That's an interesting question. If you replicate something and you're going to expect to create the same level of performance, you have to sort of rely on the same values transmissions mechanisms, the same people, and so on. It can become, these culture changes are of their own kind. They are sui generis, right? There. And it's hard to, it is hard to do that in the face of any expectations there. And yes, Jack, that was a shout out.
And then we have a question from Trin, a 2003 engineering alum, saying, change is always hard, but easier when management buys into the idea. Do you have any suggestions for someone in the lower ranks on how to get organizational buy-in for change when management is initially resistant?
When management's initially resistant, you have to put them up front or face to face with the problem there. And so there are famous examples of, of line officers, for example, in cities that may have had too small cars, asking the chief to come out, just patrol with us for a day, not telling them and not complaining about the car, but go sit in the car with us all day and see what putting the officers in compact cars was going to be like. And it's not that the cars were underpowered, they were underpowered or the like. They were just largely uncomfortable places to do business there. If you've ever looked at a modern police car, for example, you'll see computers and all sorts of places for all sorts of stuff. Putting the chief in the car just to see, okay, this is what you're doing. So in that case, if you're in a lower level problem, you have to put put the airline CEO in the middle seat, put the chief in the car, have the executive drink that coffee there out at the store off the interstate in North Carolina, as opposed to from the special machine in the company cafeteria. That's the best way to do it, is to put them up front face to face with the problem.
Yep. And then next question is from Mike. How do you turn the turmoil of the current environment into an opportunity to reset a company's culture?
Well, I mean, one of the things that being virtual has done is it's decreased the extent of interruption. It's harder to interrupt people. And one of the major sort of unspoken or hidden power plays, for example, that goes on in organizations, and this takes place, is, high power people interrupting low power people. And I think one of the things about this format is, when used appropriately, is it does level. It does reduce power differences as much as possible. You see the same persons at higher levels, medium levels, lower levels, succeeding and trying new stuff with this particular culture. That's the opportunity that you would take, is everybody's going to be humble about it. You should never, you always walk into this, and it's the same way we walked into online teaching, by saying, we're going to try this. This is new. We are never going to concede to you that this is worse. It's just different. And we'll see what norms emerge out of this. And I think some of the norms around the comm school, for example, with class participation, the use of breakout rooms, pre-negotiating things virtually, is going to create a change in the culture a little bit. Whether it's better or worse, it's going to be different. So.
Josh, I know I want to keep you on time, but I probably could ask another, 5 to 10 questions. So let me know what you want me to do.
So we got time for a few more questions. We can run a little over if you all want to stay.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So next question's from Aaron, a college alum, saying, please provide your insights about the difference in the cultural change management between the players who turn over every 4 years and the more permanent stakeholders in the program.
Sure. So you've got the permanent stakeholders, the coaches, the assistant coaches, and they've been stable. There's only been one change in athletic directors. Most of the athletic administration and even the support staff is relatively stable year after year. But it's a really good question. When the players turn over year after year, you don't give them a vote on who gets to be a part of the program. On the other hand, your eye for selecting people and talking to people who fit your value set, as opposed to are faking your value set in order to get into that particular program. It really places a premium on selection. So in an organization, it's personnel selection. In basketball, it's recruiting. And the players turn over a lot. So like a lot of professional services consulting firms, you may only have people there for a year or 2 years or 3 years. The problem's very analogous, and you can see how much time and attention they spend in recruiting, going through case interview process, case after case after case, multiple interviews with stakeholders there, and they've got a sort of a refined format for that that they use. And then what takes place behind closed doors are the current incumbent players or people in the program teaching the values and the value set in quiet moments, in Boston, and breakfast at the Friendly Toast, or wherever, and just saying, oh, we do this here, or we don't do that here. And the same thing takes place in practice. You run in basketball, you're going to run the same drills over and over and over again until people understand the value of it and the importance of it there. And that's one of the hallmarks of this program, is the sort of the consistency and the opacity of like what goes on in practice. Like they'll share the values, they'll tell you, you can play, they got books on the defense and all of that stuff, but it's the drills and what's going on behind closed doors. That's the most important thing. And that's just people communicating with each other.
And then a question from Andy, actually kind of referring to your slide on strong versus weak culture, kind of acknowledging that strong cultures aren't always ethical cultures. They can be strong, but they are autocratic or coercive. Can you contrast between positive strong and dysfunctional strong?
Yeah, no, and that's an important thing, because strong cultures, they can lead you down a very bad path. Generally speaking, strong cultures that tend to be based in values, and it's not a universalism that's true, but strong cultures that tend to be based in values focused around socialized influence or self-transcendence or benevolence are going to be stronger and healthier cultures. Stronger cultures where everyone agrees that we know we're all in it for ourselves, right? That's a strong culture, and it's based around a value. It's called achievement. It's very an individualistic achievement or personalized power. Those are value sets there. And so you kind of have to tune into what the value is, right? Everything about the 5 pillars, for example, connects to a part of the style of play that tells you that 8 people are going to play most games and 6 people are going to sit. There aren't going to be that many substitutions on the floor because the ball doesn't go out of bounds that often. There's just not that many stoppages of play. It's a set of values that are strongly agreed to, that support what the organization does. And the same thing would be true if it's a strong and healthy, like a socialized power, like we want to have influence and use it for the organization's end or for the customer's benefit there. If it becomes strong and just everybody agrees that we're all in it for ourselves, you're right, that's a strong culture, but that can lead you down a very dangerous path.
And Josh, am I good for one more?
Yes, you are.
So we got a question from Trevor, an engineering 93 alum, asking, how do you go about identifying the talent to recruit in order to sustain this culture? Do you see this on the court, or do you need to dig in deep to the personality in order to get a reliable evaluation? And then ending it with, how do companies do this when recruiting?
Yeah, no, I think if you read a lot of profiles about how the Virginia coaching staff goes about recruiting, I don't think they send emails to all 100 on the Rivals top 100 list, right? Or every 5-star gets an email there. They talk to people, they know people. It's not, they look at a lot of candidates there. They don't get every candidate that they approach or recruit too, and that's true as well. The same thing is true when you're recruiting. There's a couple of tips that, one is to observe the candidate all the way through the process. So ask yourself, how does the candidate treat everybody in the firm? Have the candidate do stuff like fill out a expense report. How scrupulous are they with that? Have the candidate engage in tests that are reflective of your culture there, and give them tests that are based on what everybody else in that particular culture values. If they're uncomfortable with those particular tests, they probably won't be particularly enthusiastic in the hiring process. That gets a little bit more difficult now than it was even 3 months ago. 3 months ago, my advice to students, for example, would be to say, you shouldn't go to a firm where you don't fit personality-wise because you're going to hate the job. Now, if you got to put food on the table, you're probably going to see a lot of people being able to fake it and get through hiring processes. Your hiring process can't compromise on that, particularly in this labor market. You're going to be able to be a little bit tighter on asking people about values and watching their behavior to see if they actually agree with them. Because people can tell you, yeah, I'm the most humble guy you've ever met. Well, just by saying that, I'm not being particularly humble, right? I'm bragging about my humility there. And so that's what you want to listen to, is you want to be able to sort of think about it that way. But you're going to have to worry. A lot of people in this market are going to be faking it until they make it, particularly when it comes to your values.
That is fantastic. Thank you, Professor Ballinger, for that very informative talk. John Rogel said, awesome insights. I know one of my favorite stories is the Kihei Clark recruitment story, which just fits the whole culture, thing to a T. Walks into a gym and sees this kid hustling, has no offers, has really nothing except for his willingness. That just fit exactly. So it just speaks volumes about, again, all those points you hit on. But
appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much.
So thank you so much for the invitation. Stevie and Tom and Lori, I really appreciate it. Josh, thanks for putting this all together. I know I am going to go home and have something from the top shelf. I've got a couple of really good selections there. And I think I'm going to toast myself. I can't believe I did this without even knowing I had the time it was a little bit over on time, but I really enjoyed this. So thank you so much, everybody.
Go watch some old highlights.
That's right.
Thanks again.
Have a great night, everyone. Thank
Good
you all
luck.
for
Yep.
coming.
See ya.